Welcome to the Word Room. I'm so glad you're here. We are going chapter by chapter through the entire Bible, breaking down the summary of each chapter, some key takeaways, and what it tells us about God. Today we're on Genesis chapter 26, and we see Isaac repeat the sins of his father. You don't want to miss this. Let's go. All right, let's jump right into our summary of Genesis chapter 26. So in this chapter, God shows up to Isaac and confirms the covenant with him, making the same promises that he made to Abraham, he makes to Isaac. We actually see this twice in this chapter where God shows up to Isaac twice, reaffirming the covenant with him. We also see that in Gerar, Isaac lies about Rebekah, claiming she is his sister because he feared that they would kill him and take her. This is the exact same sin that we saw Abraham commit both in Egypt and in the land of the Philistines. And here Isaac is in the land of the Philistines doing the exact same thing after already probably hearing the stories about Abraham, as they were probably recounted to Isaac to show Abraham how he didn't trust the Lord. Then he finally learned to trust the Lord. And here Isaac is doing the exact same sin. He grew so rich after that, however, because God was blessing him, that Abimelech sent him away from the land of the Philistines. And that's after the Philistines began to have issues with him and began to cover up the wells that Abraham had dug. So now Isaac leaves and digs new wells, and at Beersheba, the Lord blesses Abraham there so abundantly that Abimelech comes back after seeing how much God blessed him and makes a covenant with Isaac, a peace treaty of sorts with Isaac. Then we see at the end of this chapter, Esau ends up marrying Canaanite women. Esau, being Isaac's son, ends up marrying Canaanite women, and we'll talk about why that's important and why that's in this chapter in just a moment. So 5 key takeaways from this chapter. Number 1, Isaac repeated the sins of his father. And this is after God warned Isaac not to follow in the footsteps of Abraham's sin by telling him not to go to Egypt when the famine came. So just like with Abraham, a famine hit the land, Isaac was actually traveling south as if he was going to go to Egypt, and God stopped him and said, "No, do not go to Egypt. Stay in the land of Canaan, which I have promised you. Don't do what Abraham did." So Isaac obeys in the sense that he doesn't go to Egypt, but then he does what Abraham did by lying about his wife being his sister, which caused a great problem. Abimelech, however, catches them in the act of something and realizes that she was the wife of Isaac, and therefore he commands that if anybody touches her, then they would be punished. And so God protects Isaac even in the midst of that sin. The Lord then blesses Isaac by giving him 100-fold return on his crops in a season of famine. There's famine, and Isaac's blessing comes in the fact that he's getting 100-fold return on his crops, even though there's famine in the land and other people are not. Isaac becomes so rich and powerful that Abimelech sends Isaac away for being much mightier than the Philistines. And so there's some issues that arise. They begin to have conflict, and Abimelech sends Isaac away. The Philistines actually envied the blessings of Isaac. God actually appeared to Isaac twice in this chapter. Once at the start of the chapter before the sinning conflict, and once after. Isaac had an encounter with God twice, and once was after his conflict with the Philistines, after he sinned, after he lied. God shows up to him and reaffirms the covenant just like he did beforehand. Very, very important that God showed up twice, before and after the sin and conflict happened. In these encounters, God reaffirmed the covenant. Again, the covenant passed down from Abraham to Isaac. God has also chosen Jacob. We saw that in the last chapter. So God is passing down this covenant, honoring the covenant he made with Abraham for the future generations. We then see Abimelech returns after seeing God's blessing, following Isaac, and makes a covenant with him. Now, this covenant was more like a peace treaty. But the interesting thing is Abimelech saw that God, even after sending him away, even after there was conflict, and Abimelech sent him away, Abimelech saw that there was blessing following Isaac, and he goes to Isaac and says, "I recognize what God is doing. I want to make a peace treaty with you. I'm sorry for what I did. I trust that obviously you are blessed by God. And then Isaac followed the path of Abraham. We see this in the sin, but we also see this in the good side of things too. He redigs the wells that Abraham had built. He dwells in the cities that Abraham dwelled in. He takes back the dwellings that Abraham had dwelled at, the places he had dwelled at. And he also carries the blessing of Abraham as well. So all of these things, the covenant, all these things that were good, he follows in the path of Abraham. This is contrasted with Esau. Esau ignored the path of Abraham, ends up marrying Canaanite women, and intermingles with the pagans, which is exactly what Abraham didn't want for his son Isaac. Well, now Isaac's son Esau is doing that because God has actually chosen Jacob to be the one with which the covenant goes through. Esau didn't care about the covenant, and we see that in the story of him marrying these Canaanite or pagan women. This actually causes grief to Isaac and Rebekah, and we see that play into what happens in the next chapter, which we'll get to tomorrow. So 5 things this tells us about God. Number 1, God does not change regardless of our circumstances. God showed up to Isaac at the beginning of this chapter before the sin and conflict and reaffirmed the covenant. Then Isaac sins and Isaac has conflict with the Philistines, and God shows up after all of that and reaffirms the covenant again. The covenant didn't change due to Isaac's actions, so his sin did not negate the covenant, and it did not change because of the actions of the Philistines. So this is a very important principle about God. God doesn't change even when our actions and our failures cause issues. It doesn't change. And even when outside sources like the Philistines come attack, it doesn't change. God does not change regardless of the circumstances. 2, he fights our battles. Isaac didn't have to fight the battle with the Philistines. He didn't, when they buried and covered up his wells, he didn't have to go and fight them over it. He didn't argue. When Abimelech sent him out, he just left. Why? Because God fought his battles. God, in blessing him, caused his enemy Abimelech to come back and end up making a covenant with him. So even though Isaac was wronged by the Philistines, God fought the battle for him. 3, he blesses those in covenant. We see this over and over and over from Abraham now into Isaac. There's blessing that follows the covenant. Very important. The blessing was not just so Isaac could be rich and powerful, but rather it was a sign of the covenant. Number 4, God wants faith over fear. Fear is what led to Isaac's sin. Faith is what led to the blessing. Faith of Abraham and faith of Isaac led to the blessings that followed. And ultimately, God supplies our needs. The water was stopped up. The Philistines had covered the wells. Isaac didn't panic and just trusted God, built more wells, and God supplied the water for those wells. God took care of the needs of Isaac. 5 things we learned about God. Hope you dig a little deeper. Comment down below. What did you get out of this chapter? What does it tell you about God? I hope you comment down below, like the video, share the video, and I'll see you next time.